Welcome to XYPN Radio, where your host Alan Moore brings you into a community of fee-only financial planners who want to profitably and successfully serve Gen X and Gen Y clients. If you're ready to get the knowledge you need from leaders in your field, learn from forward-thinking advisors, and take action on your own goals, XYPN Radio is the show for you. Here's your host.
Hello and welcome to this episode of XYPN Radio. I'm your host, Alan Moore, and I'm excited to have XYPN member Quinn Arnold, owner of Arnold & Moat Wealth Management, on the show today. Quinn started his career in corporate finance and decided he should hire a financial planner for him and his family. He went and talked to the only fee-only firm in the area and found out they only worked with clients with $1 million, which he didn't have. But that interview sparked a relationship with the founders, and those founders convinced him to get his CFP and become a financial planner, which he did. Got the CFP and started his own firm with pretty much zero experience as a planner. He did the grind and started to gain some traction over the first couple of years when he had coffee back with those two planners that convinced him to become an advisor, and they asked him if he wanted to buy their firm, and he said yes. He has now merged firms, bought them out, and they actually still work at the firm with some of the clients that they had, and he now has 3 other team members for a total team of 6. I spent most of the episode digging into how he structured the buyout, communicated the change to clients, how they run the business, and more. I know a lot of XYPN Radio listeners have wondered about buying or merging firms, so this episode is for you. Is bookkeeping a major pain point for you? If so, you're not alone. Many financial advisors hate bookkeeping, and guess what? They're often terrible at it too. Enter the Bean team at FA Bean Counters, powered by XY Planning Network. Their free chart of accounts template will help you tackle one of the most basic but often incorrectly done bookkeeping tasks. Visit fabeancounters.com/XYPN to download the template and learn how to set up your chart of accounts like a pro. You can find any of the additional resources that we mentioned during the episode at xyplanningnetwork.com/201. Also, be sure to go to xyplanningnetwork.com/VIP to join our private group just for XYPN Radio listeners. It's the community of advisors we've all been looking for that's there to provide support when we need it the most. Best of all, it's free. I encourage you to check it out. Again, that's xyplanningnetwork.com/VIP. Without further ado, here's my interview with Quinn. Hey, Quinn, welcome to the show. Thanks so much for being on.
Thanks, Alan. I'm really excited to be here.
Yeah, and from what I know of your sort of career path and especially the last few years of being in business, we are going to have a lot to talk about. So I want to dive in just because there's so many cool things that you've been doing that I know listeners are going to be really interested in. So just sort of set the stage. Can you give just sort of a quick overview of your firm, where you're located, maybe number of clients, number of team members, and then we'll dig into the details.
Yep. We are Arnold & Moat Wealth Management. I'm the Arnold, obviously. Moats are Eric and Jean Moat. They founded the firm in 2000, and I purchased the firm last year in 2018.
So the Moat is no longer with the firm, is what you're saying?
No, they are, in fact. So that's what's exciting about the team. Eric and Jean are still actively involved in the firm. They're starting to pull back a little bit on time. They are still seeing clients, though. It takes a long time to transition. So we have about 85 households that we work with. I brought a small handful of those to the acquisition. So it was mostly Jean and Eric's clients. They had a receptionist / operations person that they were working with, but it was just the 3 of them. Then when I came in with the acquisition, we became 4. And since then we've hired 2 financial planners as well. And so we're growing quite a bit and growing in a crazy amount to me from, if you had talked to me a year or 2 ago where I was at then.
Yeah, absolutely. So what is a crazy amount? Like how many clients, because it sounds like they tend to be larger relationships. So how many clients are you bringing on in a monthly or quarterly period at this point?
Yep. And we work with people in 2 ways. We do some retainer financial planning arrangements, and those have been popular lately. I think in the last quarter, we did 5 of those, bringing on 5 new clients that way. Those may not be long-term clients. We'll see how it works out. And that's what's exciting about doing those. We do the planning and we help them with implementation. And that is something I really like doing, that model. But then we also have a traditional AUM side that's growing a little more slowly in terms of client counts. But we're adding, I think since last summer, maybe 3 substantial clients. And we just only really do focus on larger asset, typically $1 million. I know that's super boring for the industry, but those are big to us. And that's, the kind of full traditional wealth management arrangement of managing their investments and doing a financial plan and then helping them with anything and everything that comes up, including, like recommendations for a plumber kind of stuff. So yeah, so kind of two different tracks there, but yeah, we're adding clients steadily. And I would say in the midst of the merger excitement, it has seemed like a lot of clients. I know to a larger firm, this would be just business as usual, but for us, it seemed like a lot on the new client front as well.
Yeah, I mean, it's all relative, right? To a small firm, it's, 1 or 2 new clients a month is astronomical. To a big firm, they could add 10 or 15, but
yep,
pretty fast growth for a firm your size. So talk to me a little bit about your career path, because it doesn't sound like you've always been a financial advisor. So sort of how did you find your way to financial planning?
Right. Yeah, no, I'm not, and we may get into this later. I'm excited to say that all 6 of us here are career changers, and we really value that perspective. And I came from kind of an allied industry, I guess you'd call it that, to financial planning. I started out on benefits consulting, so working with large companies to implement their health and welfare plans, DC or 401k plans and pension plans. And I moved from a direct consulting role in that into more of a corporate finance role over the years. And that's what I was immediately in for one of those types of companies. It was Willis Towers Watson at the time when I left that world. And but really only on the finance side and working with our internal stakeholders on financial initiatives and reporting and all that jazz. So I thought of it as fairly similar. I use a lot of the same skills in my job now, but it was certainly more on the corporate and like HR side prior to that. And I found financial planning actually by looking for a financial planner. We had friends that were out of state and telling us that they had recently begun with a fee-only planner, and we were talking about that. And I'd since seen probably Forbes or New York Times article or something. There's always, like, every year there's some publication that talks a little bit about fee-only planning, and then looked that up in Cedar Rapids where my family lives, and we didn't find a lot. There's not a lot of fee-only planners in the area, and the ones that came right to the top of the list were Gene and Eric Moat, who I'm privileged to work with. And we had started talking, and, I was in my early to mid 30s at the time and had just 401k assets. And so did my wife. And, we were just the people who, traditionally have been harder to work with, because although we had pretty substantial 401k savings, there was really nothing else. And that was just because we had, young kids, had moved jobs around, a bunch of different things, and, just had cash flow needs that didn't allow us to amass that, $1 million savings that everybody's looking for. So Gene and Eric were very gracious to talk with me, but did tell me I was not like a target or an ideal client for them. And they were at the point in their careers where they could be choosy about that, and rightfully so, that they should be looking for the right kind of clients. But because of my background, and I was just asking a lot of questions, they wanted to talk some more, and we kept talking about what it was like to be a financial planner, and I wasn't really aware of what that was compared to a traditional, stockbroker kind of thing that I grew up with, or an insurance agent for that matter. So we started talking, and they suggested that if I was ever interested in a career change, which I habitually am interested in career changes. So if I was ever interested, we should keep talking. And we did. And over the span of, I suppose, about 2 years, they convinced me I should go into the business. And
very cool.
Yeah. So that was how I got into it.
I'm not sure. I've only heard from a couple of folks that they discovered financial planning by looking for a planner, and very much in the, I'll call it, vulnerable position of kind of being told, like, I'm sorry, you're not rich enough. I mean, and the end of the story is good. I imagine that moment, it doesn't feel very good. And I remember this, and this is not on the same level. But I remember when I first started my firm trying to get in with TD Ameritrade, and trying to get on a custodian and being told like, oh, sorry, you don't have enough assets. Go get more assets and come back. And I'm like, but I need your platform to get assets.
Right.
So like, how's this going to work? And obviously now we have the relationship with TD Ameritrade through XYPN Network. So other advisors don't go through that situation. They can all get on TD without any asset minimums. But that's the feeling that I think clients get. It is a tough conversation. It doesn't make the advisor a bad person. I don't mean to knock on them, but it is a tough position to be in when you finally get the courage to go talk to someone about money and you just don't have enough wealth. Because even if you were saving 50% of your income, you wouldn't have had $1 million yet. I mean, like, you're just too young. You haven't had time. So.
Yeah, for sure. And so I have a heart for that now. I feel, it's obviously professionally tempting to work with high asset people in terms of you're like, oh, great, I could just dedicate a little, to this one person or these key clients, and that's all I need and that kind of thing. But I also feel very strongly that we should have an offering for people who don't have those kinds of resources and yet need help. And I suppose it is reflecting back on myself and where I was, but also there's definitely a market need there too that could be fulfilled.
So what did the transition then look like to becoming a financial planner? Did you enroll in a program and get your CFP? Sort of what did that look like?
Yeah, good question. Eric and Jean, the Moats, said that, I had to do that. That was if they were ever going to help me anymore with, starting a business or anything like that, I would have to pursue the CFP. So they've been very active in NAPFA for almost 20 years now. They went through that themselves when they switched. They were career changers too, and just were extremely supportive of that. So I did sign up for a program. It was Kaplan. It could have been probably in any number of other ones. And I did that while I was working full time and had little kids at home. So it can be done. I'm not that exceptional in my studying abilities, but I did that, and at the same time, I found XYPN and had joined XYPN just, I guess, about 3 years ago now, but was relying on a lot of, kind of non-CFP education, I'll call it, through XY and through Kitsis's blog and a lot of other things where you get everything else you need in order to learn how to actually start a business. And for some reason, I was not put off by the sheer terror that should have struck into my heart. But and probably what it was I had a very stable career with, high income and was thinking like, oh, I will always have a job and I'll never have any kind of issue. So probably quite a bit of naivete there in terms of just like, oh yeah, you can just totally switch into some other kind of career and at the same time start your own business. And it has worked. It's just, I was not prepared for the amount of preparation and effort it would take. But I will also say I was very satisfied with not only, we don't have to make a commercial for you, Alan, here, but very satisfied with not only how XY supported me, how Jean and Eric supported me, how the community of other advisors supported me, so we could make it a little more generic.
And that's really the power of it, right? It's that community. And that's, when we ask members, what's the number one value of membership? It always comes back to the community and the other advisors who are willing to give the shirt off their back to help someone else, because most of us, someone gave us the shirt off their back when we were starting. And it's sort of this pay it forward mentality.
Yeah.
When we did some work recently where we were trying to sort of define psychometric descriptors of our members and like what makes our members different than others. And one of them was givers, not takers. That was one that came up. And it really is that collaborative mentality where people aren't joining XY, or maybe some of them slip through, but for the most part, they're not joining to just like get all the information, ask for a lot of help, and then never help anybody else. It really is this community mentality, because starting a business is hard. I don't care how much money you have in the bank or what, if you have the world's greatest niche or the world's greatest idea and all of these things, it just takes time and it's still a roller coaster.
Yep.
I don't know anyone who is having an easy time running a business, right? No one ever says it's easy.
Right. No, it's extremely satisfying. It can be fun. It can be a great learning opportunity, but it's not easy.
So, okay, so you start getting your CFP and you decide to launch your own firm. Was there not the opportunity to work with your now partners, I guess in that time, or they just wanted you to have some experience before you jumped in there?
That would have been, in retrospect, probably something for me to push more on. And I think Gene and Eric would have been okay with that. I don't know if I felt like working for myself was the dream, and it's ironically come back to working with them anyway. But it was not like an overt possibility at the time. I don't think either of us thought like, yeah, we should do that. And I just turned away from that path. So now, knowing what I know, that would have been maybe a more appropriate way to get into this instead of just learning everything all at once, but like in Big Bang style. But it worked out because they were still there to help me. They fed me referrals. It was, very supportive in that way, but I probably should have just said, hey, can I just, get a small salary from you and learn all the basics first before I do anything?
Retrospect is a beautiful thing, huh?
Oh, well. Oh, well.
I think that's the thing is we all learn differently and there's no right way to do this. And yes, we do push back because we see success rates being much higher for folks who do have some experience, who, have a natural market or a niche market to serve and all those things. But it doesn't mean that it's a wrong or a bad path. It's just your path. And you have to be sure that you're on the right one. So what did sort of that first year or two look like for you? I mean, what was it like starting a business with no experience as a financial advisor, just with sort of the education, but not the experience?
Right. Yeah. Yeah. So after completing the CFP coursework, which I was wrapping that up at the time that I launched the RIA, I think I had the capstone or something left to do. So I had at least spent a little time up front, or like not trying to do everything all at once, but it was very typical for what you have found in the, like the benchmarking study and other things, just even anecdotally in the industry, that, I started off waiting for people to call me and being confused why they weren't. And then once I found out they weren't ever going to call, just because I had like told a few people that I now could do their financial planning, then I figured out, oh, okay, well, I need to start some kind of marketing strategy and also just get into more things like talking to Gene and Eric about more referral prospects, talking to other planners in the area. There are some others in the area. And so I slowly brought on a couple of clients. I think when I was looking back, because I wasn't keeping, I will say about this myself. Sean Tidlaska was in my launcher group, or I should say I was in his, because I learned a tremendous amount from him. He is very metric focused. I highly appreciate that. That is not me, even though I come from a corporate finance background, or I was not ever like, oh yeah, now I got this client, and then tallying off and, knowing my exact things. And so I think looking back, I'm like, okay, I think I got 5 clients in the first year. That was a mix. There were 2 or 3 that were ongoing clients. I was super excited and proud of selling ongoing services when I had no idea what that meant. And then I had some hourly projects, or, they're kind of like one-off project clients as well. And then by the next year, it was like 9 clients. I saw that as, although feeling good about being able to sell and getting, the limited number of leads that I did have, get them through the process, it was frustrating because at this whole time I was still working part-time in my old career, and I wanted to move out of that career and be done with that. And right or wrong, like I probably could have made a go of it in this third year to leave anyway, in spite of the acquisition coming up. I could have made a go of it financially with my wife and everything, but it just felt like that was still the lifeline when I had such a small practice. And so it was that very typical, like extremely small practice. I had no magic for getting leads or referrals or anything like that I could just immediately build a 50 client practice around. So it was the slog that you've heard from others.
That's it. And just for listeners' benefit, so Sean Titlaska is out of California. We had him on back in episode 103, which is crazy because that's 2 years ago now.
Yeah.
Like, that's mind-blowing to me. So episode 103, so xypnetwork.com/103, and you can hear Sean's story. But also, I did an episode with Sean specifically around KPIs, and that was episode 114. So xypnetwork.com/114 or 114. That'll get you there. And yeah, Sean is a stickler for metrics, which I love because that's Michael in my life is, he makes me collect more data than I ever thought existed. And it's really cool to see, actually. But it can be a little burdensome at times, but it can be really helpful. But I don't think in terms of metrics either. I sort of go by gut feel on most things, which drives Michael nuts. So.
Yeah. But I mean, we admire in other people what we can't do ourselves. And so I admire that about Sean and I appreciate it, but I did not practice it that way. So if somebody feels bad that they're not collecting all those KPIs and everything, know that there have been other people making that same choice ahead of you that it works out okay on too.
Yep. You can make it. You just have to play to your strengths. Don't always try to compensate for your weaknesses. Hire for your weaknesses. Or surround yourself in a study group with people with your weakness because, you get a ton of benefit from having Sean in a study group that you're working with on various things. And he's going to get benefit from you having a different perspective.
Yeah, probably not as much reciprocally back then, I will say.
He may say something different. We'll have to ask.
You just talk. I'll listen.
So you get started, you get into the grind, you're starting to see some success because you're starting to get clients.
Yes.
What changed or what happened? What was sort of the catalyst for this massive transition of maybe I should go buy a practice?
Yeah. Well, that was something that I'm not going to say I was like super familiar with the RIA acquisition process, but from my corporate finance background, I understood a little bit about how some of these things work. So I'm not ignorant of acquisition strategies and of, what are the things that you need to do. There was just not any opportunity until Gene and Eric, we would just periodically have coffee or lunch or something. And they were brave enough to come out and say, have you ever thought about buying our practice? And I was taken a little off guard in that first meeting, but and they said, well, is that something you would consider? And I was like, yes, right. Yes. Please put down like capital YES because it hit at the time where I was starting to think like, oh God, how long is this going to take for, adding one client at a time, getting the, this piece of learning done in terms of this client situation. And there's a lot to that where, and working on my own, I wasn't afraid of working on my own, but I've had a career working with others. And so that was nice. Also, that thought in the back of my mind of like, wow, what if I could have other people to work with again? And so they brought it up. They're just retirement age. They were looking for a succession plan. They had not had one in place because of just circumstances over the past couple of years. And they had started to dip their toes into this with FP Transitions. That's one of the big consulting firms around mergers and succession. And so they had been doing their homework and actually knew quite a bit about what would be involved from the financing side and things like that. And so, but they broached the topic and I was ready. And so in one of those very, very, very small cosmic coincidences or fate things, it worked out from that one coffee we had. So, but yeah, that's how it came out.
That's awesome. I personally lean to the side of just like tell people what you're thinking and then find out. Like I hate beating around the bush. I'm just like, hey, you want to come work here? And 99% of the time the answer is like, no.
Yeah.
And sometimes those folks will circle back around. Sometimes they're like, yeah, I would like to. And like, okay, let's just start there and we'll be on the same page. But it is uncomfortable.
I need to get better about that. That's not been one of my strengths over the years, is to just say what I'm thinking straight out to people, and that there's some advantage to that. Yep.
But very cool that they broached it. I assume they were, starting to think about retirement, starting to think about how this transition was going to be. So how did you go about the transition? I mean, this is a pretty major thing for their clients, but also I guess we can talk about a few different pieces. One, let's start with the negotiation process of, you say, I want to buy your firm. That's just, table stakes, right? So now we got to go through the process. So did you hire a broker? Did you go to, some of the platforms that are out there, just do it internally?
So we did end up hiring FP Transitions to consult with us, and so they have a engagement level for this type of thing. And they were great. So they assign to you, well, first in the sales process, when they're kind of talking through that, they just start to share a bunch of information. So it's very much like how we would work with a financial planning client, in the sense of or how I think we ideally like to, where you share a bunch of info and then begin to make them realize that they need some help. And so that was exactly what they did. And, we're like, okay, here's our, 86-point checklist of things that we suggest you go through. And you're like, oh, wow, I really need some guidance. And so we did hire them. They helped with then setting up people I could talk to for financing. And so I did not have the kind of disposable cash laying around to buy a firm. That does lead to different kinds of negotiations and processes if you're that kind of a purchaser. But I was the purchaser where I needed a big loan, and we decided a kind of a two-pronged approach. And I'm not bringing a lot of creativity to this. This is just best practice stuff that FP talks about. So part of the purchase price was a loan through a bank, and I'm going with Oak Street Bank. It's just one of the banks out there that loans in this space. And then the other piece is a promissory note to Eric and Jean that is 6 years long. And so I'll be paying them back quarterly for 6 years for some of the value of this. And then I did bring some cash to the table too upfront as a down payment and to help make this work out. Because I also was not as nervous then at that point. I mean, assuming this whole deal worked out, the cash flow for my actual firm. So my RIA purchased the assets of their RIA. Their RIA has since been withdrawn. And so my RIA, I was in this position where we had very little cash flow. It was completely negative, and I still had part-time income, W-2 income and all this kind of stuff. So it was, the day the acquisition went through, the cash flow for my RIA changed considerably. So I was feeling good about that in terms of taking on debt and taking on and giving up some of the cash that I thought I might have to live on if I was, running my much smaller client base. And there's advantages for the sellers too, with all of this too. They get different tax treatment depending on how you sell the firm. And that's all good stuff. I would highly suggest getting help to work through that if this is your first time. I mean, I wouldn't suggest, I'd say, you'd be a fool not to get some kind of help for it. But then there's the whole client side, and the client side is its own thing. And an FP was good about that. They were good in suggesting here's how we find this is successful for RIAs. And they're good because it's not just broker dealers they work with and selling books and all that kind of jazz. That's, not applicable here. So they know our space a little bit, and they were saying, this is what we suggest you do. And we got our own lawyers involved here locally to help out with some of the contracting. But the major thing that's really quite important to keep in the back of your mind, and I have to remind myself of this just about daily, is that there is no, I mean, I put down a lot of money and there's big loans, but there's no tangible asset. It's just client goodwill when it comes down to it.
Just cash flow.
Yeah, that is what it is. You're buying cash flow. You're buying work. I think somebody else has coined that term, but you're buying a job, you're buying cash flow, and the clients are free to leave. You have to ask them to sign a new agreement, and that has to be done. So it's right out of the gate. But we're financial planners, and we are people focused, and Eric and Jean are 10 times better at this than I am. And so they know they've had some of these clients for 18, 20 years, and they've known these people personally. And so we went through the strategy for all of the key clients and, what would this person think about having dinner with Quinn? And then for this other person, what about just a little informal drop in to begin with? And so there's a lot of that work that's aside from the nuts and bolts of the acquisition, which is not inconsequential. That stuff's pretty substantial too. But But I'd say the client side is, I mean, that's the critical thing really to focus on, because at the end of the day, you want those clients sticking around. And so far we're 8 months into it and we haven't lost one yet. So it could happen.
That is awesome. Let me circle back on just one thing. Are you willing to share what percentage of the purchase what percentage was down payment, what percentage was seller finance, and what was bank finance?
Yeah, totally. So people, I won't share the outright numbers, but people will totally figure this out, because you could figure it out from, like my ADV and stuff like that, our approximate revenues and everything. But so a few things there. The bank loan was about 30%. The promissory note to the former partners was about 65%, 60 to 65%, and then about 5% down payment of cash. And then we sold at a multiple just a little over 2 times annual revenue. It was about 2.1.
So I appreciate you sharing that. Finding... It's one of the interesting things about our business, because of the dynamic that you talked about. You're not buying assets. You're not buying something that the bank can come take. You're buying cash flow, which is risky on one hand for the business, but on the other hand, financial planning firms tend to just sort of grow.
Yeah.
So
yep.
You have to find a bank that really understands our business model. So for folks that are out there thinking about buying a firm, what was the bank again that you used?
I used Oak Street. So I looked at the Dueling Oaks as
Oak Street and Live Oak,
and then
right?
Live Oak is the other one. And they just have different financing structures. So Live Oak does small business administration loans. Oak Street, which is what I settled on, was more conventional lending. They just call it portfolio lending. And so they have different things they're looking for, kind of different guidelines that the loan officers can work around. And it was great. They were great to work with. You're absolutely right, though. I would not have wanted to try to do this with my local credit union. They would have had no idea what I was talking about.
Yeah, having people that understand your business. I mean, we've struggled with this at XY Planning Network, just getting a line of credit.
Sure.
And they're like, okay, well, we'll do it against your accounts receivables. And I'm like, we don't have accounts receivables. And like, well, what about, the assets or the machinery? I'm like, we have like MacBook Pros.
Right.
Like, how many of those do I need to make this work? So finding a bank that understands cash flow businesses is tough, but that's why, the two dueling oaks, the two oak trees are there as options, because they just have a wing that specializes in the RA world, but a little bit easier of a conversation. So great to know, because I know, buying a practice is something that a lot of folks have a goal of. I mean, that was my goal, just never could find the right fit. And I guess I'm asking you to speak for them, but I know, when you look at selling a practice, it's like, okay, like just for easy math, I make $100,000 and I can sell it to you for $200,000, or I could just hire you and let you run it, and I'll just keep making $200,000 year over year over year. And I mean, that's how you maximize it, right? So why sell? Like, what's the incentive to sell?
Yeah, that's a good question. I think, and their thoughts have maybe changed on this over the last year or so, because it's just been about a year since we actively started negotiations. And I think at the time they were thinking we may need to get out of here, not because of like health reasons or anything like that, but just in the sense of like they were starting to want to spend more time away from the practice with friends and travel and things like that, and just doing other things. And I think they were thinking there may need to be a hard break or something that could be figured out like that, instead of just letting the practice die, which I think is what happens. So, and these are not, I mean, so they have a pretty traditional practice in the sense of like, we have some clients that are not good fits anymore, but we keep them around because we like, meeting with them and having coffee and chatting but there are some, fairly demanding clients that are also fairly high revenue, and it's just not easy to back away from them if you want to be like, oh, I'd like to just work 3 days a week or something like that. And
makes sense.
So I think they were thinking they may have to get something real official lined up so that they could just completely step away. And I again, speaking for them, I think what they feel like now is that with the arrangement we have, because they like doing the work, and it can still be some like part-time-ish income, which we're kind of figuring out as we go, it's something they still could have some role in, but they've been extremely gracious about not running this firm. They almost immediately were like, Quinn's in charge. It's him making decisions. It's, they're very consultative. They just could not be better in that sense as sellers. I know there are horror stories out there about people who you think are going to go and don't, and they have to have difficult conversations, and we've not had that experience. And so it's possible to do it. I don't know of, how to convey to other people how to find that, other than obviously spend a lot of time with your potential partner before you ever sign any kind of deals. That's be one way to figure it out.
I tell you what, that is beyond impressive. I've really only heard a story like that, maybe one or two other times where the owner, or in this case, owners, were able to sell and stay. I mean, as a business owner, I cannot imagine selling XY Planning Network and then coming back. It just blows my mind. Yeah. And I get it. I mean, what a wonderful, this is the ideal situation. You get to buy the practice. They get to get out of the day-to-day grind, but they still get to work with clients. You get to retain the clients, and they make money. You make money. This is the perfect scenario. But as we know from financial planning, the perfect scenario is not always enough.
Right.
The world's greatest financial plan still has to be implemented, and there's that human element, which can be a struggle sometimes.
Yeah. Oh, yeah. Absolutely. It's a people business, and we're people too. And that's not to say everything is just smiles and sunshine every day, but it's working really well. We respect each other just so much, and are friends much more, even than we used to be, just more as kind of like referral partners, actually. And so they're just extremely supportive of me, and they obviously have a financial stake in that. I need to pay them back on the loan, but also they're generous and extremely thoughtful about their role in the firm. And so I think we both feel like it couldn't have worked much better, and it takes work, but it's so far so good.
Ultimately worth it. So you mentioned a little bit of this, but just the conversations that happen with clients. So you mentioned have dinner with Quinn, and was that sort of the process of let's do something a little less formal and then more formally introduce, or was it one day of okay, Quinn's your planner, good luck?
Yeah. So it really has been client specific as to how we've approached it. For some of the clients, we've very rapidly moved so that I am in the forefront, and Eric and Jean are just supporting, and we've gotten so that with that, and these are some of the key clients, so we're not there with all of them, but where I'm doing all of the follow-up, I'm leading the meeting, Eric and Jean are there in the meeting, and then that's kind of it. It's oh, it's so good to see you again. They've known these people for 10 years, and how's your granddaughter, and all this kind of stuff. But to move the authority over to me, we take some steps like that so that there's not a lot of confusion. And then for some of the other clients, we're going a little more slowly. And what's nice, I should say, the part of the contract here, and this is, I think, fairly standard from FP transitions perspective, is how do you keep people and how do you keep the sellers engaged so that they're supporting the new owner? And so we had worked out for a year a consulting agreement for what that would mean for Eric and Jean to, what's actually involved. And we just wrote down, a few bullet points of, supporting Quinn's transition with clients, and, being present for meetings and helping with follow-up, and, just some very basic kinds of things that they could do. And so that is changing as the months go by in this year as to what that exactly looks like with each client. And then for some of the clients, when we're talking some friends and family stuff that we feel are pretty low key, it's Eric and Jean sort of still get the email, and they'll ask me do you want to do this trade, or do you want to set up this meeting or whatever? But it's we'll kind of take our time with those clients in terms of saying Quinn is the advisor, and you are you ought to be speaking to him, not to us, kind of thing. So you'll find we're very flexible and also not super dogmatic about how we approach this, but it's also working because I think, just recognizing all these clients have different perspectives, and some were asking like, what's Quinn like? Is he, why did you do this? And it was, maybe a more normal reaction that you might expect from clients of fear or just nervousness about what's going on. And then other clients have been just like, oh, great. I like this guy. Let's talk more. And it's, we're just trying to be very client focused on this and let them take us where we're going, and not like adhere to specific times during the whole acquisition process that certain milestones have to be hit or things like that.
That is fantastic. Well, I have to say congratulations on this. When you're living in it, I'm just going to make a presumption. Like when you're living in it, it just seems like, oh, like I had this coffee date and then they asked me if I wanted to buy and then I bought it and now I run the company. Like it's so easy to just like gloss over the just amazing opportunity that you created for yourself. And we're able to find and cultivate and making this happen. Like this didn't just happen by accident. This was a pretty significant, just a really significant thing. And so I applaud you on that and being able to make this happen.
Well, yeah, thank you. I mean, I don't know that you just bring an open mind and hard work and keeping focused on the people, I think is the big thing. Both, the potential partners, the clients, that kind of stuff. And I have to even, we do things. So Alan, if you don't know me very well, but if other people listening would know me, they'd, we've been running in tandem eMoney and Money Guide Pro now for 8 months, and old Quinn, that would have just driven me nuts. But new Quinn is like, that's fine. It's okay.
So new Quinn is lower stress.
Just 2 different planning tools. Who cares? We'll figure out the planning tool. It's okay.
Oh, that's funny. So you mentioned that okay, so it's you have operations, the 2 founders who are now working, and then you have these 2 part-time advisors. How did you make the decision to hire 2 more people? And then how did you go about finding those people that are going to be a good fit in your firm?
Yeah. Yep. We recognized the need during the acquisition that if the firm was going to grow, although Eric and Jean would not be considered, the way that they practice, it wasn't like they were 2 separate advisors. So they each had their own level of capacity because they would sit in on the same meetings, and they would obviously split up tasks and things, but they weren't exactly like 2 independent advisors. But just like having one person come in, and I had a very small set of clients, but that would have been a lot to offload, and it would have left really no opportunity for growth in the future. So we identified that as just one of the strategic decisions with the merger, is to, eventually bring on additional planners, because there is a need in the area. There's not enough for NAPFA, XYPN, fee-only type level of advising. And so we get a fair number of people inquiring. Eric and Jean were turning down a fair number of people because of their own capacity restraints, and that was not going to get better unless I hired. So, and I feel like strongly, even though it does not make life easier to have other planners, like that doesn't make anything easier around here. I also feel like it's important that this business grows. It's beyond just me, and also that we help people. I mean, I do not want to be just constantly having conversations about like, well, I don't know, I don't think we can fit you in. Go find somebody else. So that would not have been satisfying to me. So I've decided, part of my level of work as the owner is that I need to nurture more people and get more people planning, because there's a need for it. And so how do we find him? Well, the first person, his name's Matt Hilland. He is also in XYPN, and he works for us part-time, and he has his own RIA. And we met because Maddie assigned us to the same study group after launching. And
that's awesome.
So he was living in Virginia with his wife, and they were working there, and she got a new job in Iowa and moved here. And he had like reached out to say like, or maybe we were on a study group call, and he was like, hey, I'm moving to Iowa. Where do you live? And because people don't usually know where Iowa is, if they even know if it's not Ohio. So he was looking around and like, oh, well, we're going to be very close. And that was, like about a year, I think, before our merger, but we had been meeting for happy hours very frequently, and were, very, very connected. And so Matt's a bit younger than me, but very bright and great at planning. And so and Eric and Jean had met him and liked him a lot. And so when we did the merger, we just started talking to him to say, we need additional horsepower, like somebody who we would trust. And he has graciously, again, like just these are things that I guess you take advantage of the opportunities that arise because you can't maybe make some of these things work out on your own. But he has said, okay, I'll come in and work for you part-time. He wants to continue as RIA, at least for now. I talk to him like weekly to say like, oh, wouldn't you rather just work here all the time? So he's probably getting tired of that conversation. I may need to try a different tack as a manager now. So that's Matt. He's great because he just has jumped right in and knows exactly like what we're trying to do and knows the tools and, has his own client experience to bring to stuff. And so in so much as you could find somebody, if you're looking to hire, if you could find somebody else who, is open to that kind of an arrangement, at least initially, that's been great. So.
Yeah, what an awesome piece. And I know a lot of owners are not interested in that, situation because there's fear of like, well, what if he takes some of my clients or am I going to get his focus? He has another business. When push comes to shove, he's going to focus on his business, not mine. So how do you overcome some of those concerns that I know folks are thinking about, how crazy that this sounds?
Yeah. Because, we are vulnerable and I'm trying to be more that way. I mean, that sounds probably kind of stupid when you say it out loud to be like, well, I'd like to be more vulnerable as a business. But like in the sense of, you mentioned at the beginning, you're better at this than I am with saying things out loud that you are thinking. And so I'm trying to practice that and say like, Matt, we would like you to work here. And if you could work part-time, that is a great stepping stone. We also don't plan too far ahead here, despite being a planning firm. So if things are working out well, let's keep doing that. If they're not working out so well, that's fine. I mean, obviously there's things like, the legal stuff like NDAs, non-disclosure agreements and non-competes are signed, and we are not naive or ignorant, but we're trying to be vulnerable in that sense to say, you don't know. And Jean has said that to me in a great deal of wisdom, is to say like, you don't know what will happen even in short time periods. And so seizing the opportunities as they present themselves, as long as it works out with your general thing. If I had really wanted to just be a solopreneur and thought like, yeah, I will maximize all the efficiency in this practice, I will handle what Jean and Eric were doing. I will not hire anybody or anything like that. We could have done that too, but that wasn't my strategic focus. So I guess, finding how the opportunities that present themselves work with your strategic focus is important, and getting to know Matt. I mean, that was just sheer fate or luck that I could get to know him. We drove down to St. Louis last year for XYPN together, like before any of this was going on. Well, no, not before. Before I asked him, the merger was clearly going on, but this opportunity to work together. And so, we spent 9 hours in a car together also talking about things. So that's
sure.
You get to know people. So, there's those basic kinds of things like get to know the people and trust them, be somewhat vulnerable in the sense of what you are open to. And then obviously, like talk to a lawyer or something too. Like don't be stupid, but be vulnerable.
Fair enough. So what are some of the things that you're working on? Because, you just went through a huge transition, buying the firm, and getting the clients transitioned over, getting everyone comfortable with their new seats. You've hired a couple folks. What are the next, sort of 12 to 24 months? What do those look like for you?
Yeah, for the firm, it's to continue to figure out how do we put ourselves out there as a comprehensive planning firm that has now a couple of different personalities and different skill sets and different niches even in what we want to focus on. I do have to mention that we also hired another career changer as more of an intern. She's new to the industry, Jessie, and we think just so highly of her. But she'll have, I think, we'll figure this out because she needs to become a full advisor and pass the CFP and that kind of stuff. But as she figures that out, like, I think she's going to have a different kind of niche than what I have currently. And so I need to figure out how we do that because it's easier if the firm would only have one one target client. And so we're feeling that out. And I have to honestly very rapidly shift gears from over these past couple of years, I was just focused on like, how do I become a really good planner? And not sure I hit that mark completely, but I think I'm sufficient. And then to now, how do I be a very good manager again? And I've had that experience in my former life, but it was needing to very rapidly shift those gears to say, how do I think more like a business owner for a multi-person firm, and also be nurturing Jesse and Matt and others that might come along as future opportunities. So that's a little bit of that's a stretch for me personally. For the firm, we just need to figure out how all of us can like hit on all cylinders for 99% of the time, because it's not that we're like making mistakes or anything, but there's just a lot where we're like, oh, what do you think we should do about this? And oh, yeah, we should all sit and talk about that a little bit first. So it'll be nice when we're just better at like, oh, this is actually like a real firm now where we have common operations and common way of talking to clients and things that are, just that we're figuring out day by day.
I will be the bearer of bad news and tell you that it very rarely gets any better.
I know.
Because, you get this new system and you're like, okay, this is the right meeting structure with the right people in the room with a right agenda. And it is for like a week. And then you hire another person and it all goes to crap. And you're like, oh man, we got to redo this. So yeah, we have probably changed our just like team meeting structure 6 or 7 times, wholesale overhaul here at XY, just as we've grown, because the meetings, used to be 3 of us in a room together. And then when there's 7 or 8, it changes, So anyway. But I do think you also hit on a really good point, and I think it's important to recognize, I commend you for recognizing it, and that is none of us were born great managers.
Right.
And if you're going to hire employees, you are going to become a manager. I mean, I know when I started, XY, Maddie, employee number 1 here at XY, she is hitting her 5 years here in a couple of weeks, which is just mind-blowing to me. She was the first employee I ever managed. I never had a team member. I was always managed. And you do try to learn, but there are things that you can do to learn to do it better. And that's something we're going to be working on here at XY is, resources and helping to train advisors on this, just because many of our members are in the position you're in of, all right, like hiring my first person or 2. And then you realize like, wow, this management thing's really hard actually.
Yes. Yeah. Yeah. And your impact on their lives is profound. It really, if you think of like a lot of times when people look back on their careers, you don't think of like the projects you necessarily worked on. It's like, did I have a great manager that I loved? And honestly, we brought on recently a former manager of mine who reached out. And again, I was not being like open and direct enough with him because I just never thought he would want to work with us. But he does. We love him as a client. And he has made such an impact on my life and now continues to as a client, which is crazy. But then I can think back like, oh, God, I really remember a bad manager I had too. So it makes a big difference on people's lives, and you have to respect the power of that.
It really does. They say people don't quit jobs, they quit managers. And that is absolutely true. And you can work for the world's greatest company with the greatest culture. And if your manager isn't up to snuff and you just don't see eye to eye and can't get eye to eye, you're going to leave because they have, one, you spend more time with your manager than you do with your partner. So, that's just a reality. But you're absolutely right that it's a position that's worthy of investment, and because the impact that you do have and the impact that you can have on another person is huge. They say, the sign of a great leader is the number of leaders they create and help nurture and mentor. So, for listeners who are afraid of becoming a manager, I will tell you it's harder than it actually sounds, even if it sounds really hard, but it's not impossible. But you're not born a great manager, but you can learn. And there's so many resources out there to learn how to lead and how to manage and, how to have hard conversations, because people aren't perfect and they're going to screw up and they're going to say something they shouldn't or do something they shouldn't. And you want to be able to help and guide and lead. And even if, you're not the perfect person, you still got to lead people. So.
Yeah. And well, that's exactly right. And so it's worthwhile to learn it. And it's, and I think too, just if you even just put on your cold, hard, banker's green shade kind of hat, it's it's pretty important in a small business that you get that right, because, if you're working at IBM and you have one terrible manager and that person torpedoes a small team at IBM, it's like, oh, okay, that won't even show up in the earnings statement. But like, if I torpedo something here, it's done. The whole thing's done. So that does weigh on me in terms of the pressure. It's literally, how do I keep the clients happy and how do I keep the people working here happy? And then everything else will sort of work out, actually, because it's like the people will be doing great work and the clients will be happy and continue to pay us. And so I try to keep that in mind, in the sense of like, oh, that's not two small accomplishments to look for, but also as long as those things work, I don't fixate on like what's our AUM or what's the revenue growth or things like that.
And this is why I love doing the podcast and talking to advisors, because, it's a good reminder that we need to do more around management training, because we do it for our team. It's something we've started doing more of, and that's something we need to make available to others, because, we didn't do it when it was just me either hiring my first person. I wish I had. I wish I had gone through more training and systematized things more. We are very lucky that Maddie stuck with us through the crazy that was that first couple of years. So.
She's awesome. Shout out to her alma mater, which is in town or close by. So she
absolutely,
talk about the area when she's thinking about her good old college days.
She goes back to Iowa from time to time. Gets back to the Midwest.
Yeah, I think so. So
anyway, I'll be sure she hears the shout out. So, as we're sort of coming to a close, if you think about your career, which is, you absolutely did not end up where you thought you were going to end up when you, we got into corporate finance, but you've had a really, I don't want to say typical, no one's path is typical. You've had the typical crazy career that many of us have had. But,
sure.
If you were to go back and talk to younger Quinn, the Quinn that was starting a financial planning firm or thinking about merging practices, really any time in there, and go back and give yourself one piece of advice, what do you think that one piece of advice would be?
Oh, I thought about this. This has been like, I think like when I wake up in the middle of the night, what am I going to say? So here's what I think I'm going to say. I've been reading, and I will give a shout out to Amy Irvine for this, because she was highly recommending Daring Greatly by Brene Brown. I think it's Brene.
Yeah, Brene.
That has been a very impactful book. And I am one of those people that is irritating to talk to about books because they're all impactful. So this is the current impactful book for me. But I would tell my younger self, like, to be more vulnerable. And now that word keeps coming up because I'm like, oh, that really sticks in my head. But be more open with people. And I had never thought that courage was a problem. And I kept telling myself that, oh, of course I'm, courageous or brave or stupid or whatever, because I'm switching careers. I'm starting a firm and no big deal. And, oh, no problem that I have 2 young children at home and all that kind of stuff. But that wasn't the kind of bravery that I think it really takes to do well, especially in this business. It was just, I was not open to the idea of being more empathetic with people directly and being more willing to say, I'm not going to be ashamed if I don't know this thing, or if I make this mistake. That was something that in the corporate world you learn to, she talks a lot about this in the book. That is just a very common way of succeeding and surviving in large environments like that, is to not admit issues or how things are impacting you. And I know that this is not going to be tremendously applicable to people as they're like, oh, I would just like to get my registration done with my state regulator. But on the other hand, it's like, please do think about that, because you're in a profession where that's so powerful to be open and vulnerable and talk about the things that you are ashamed of or that you have struggled with, because that is going, I think, I'm not practicing this as well as I could be, but I think that will be very important for clients. And, and if you think of clients as people that you want to be around and you want to enjoy their presence, I think it's really critical to learn that about yourself. So I would totally tell myself that at a younger age. And, that's just what happens. I missed that opportunity, but
I love it. Thank you so much for that advice. I think that is just absolutely amazing. And thank you, Quinn, for taking the time to come on the show and share your story and what you're up to. It has been an exciting year, and I imagine the next year or two will be equally as exciting. So thank you again.
Oh, yeah, I think so. Thank you, Alan. This was great. It was fun.
Is bookkeeping a major pain point for you? If so, you're not alone. Many financial advisors hate bookkeeping, and guess what? They're often terrible at it too. Enter the Bean team at FA Bean Counters powered by XY Planning Network. Their free chart of accounts template will help you tackle one of the most basic but often incorrectly done bookkeeping tasks. Visit fabeancounters.com/XYPN radio to download the template and learn how to set up your chart of accounts like a pro. Be sure to join our VIP community at xyplanningnetwork.com/VIP to hang out with other XYPN radio listeners, ask questions for future mailbag episodes with myself and Kitsis, and to finally find a community of like-minded financial advisors. Thanks so much for joining me today. We'll see you next time.
You're not alone, and you're not crazy. It's scary starting, building, and growing your own financial planning firm. And that's why we put together a free private community just for you, the Cutting Edge Financial Planner. Go to xyplanningnetwork.com/VIP or text XYPN Radio to 33344 and join a network of thousands ready to change the lives of Gen X and Gen Y clients.